Hey, welcome back to Common Mansplaining, ladies and gentlemen. This is Eddie, that's Christian. Guys, we're going to talk today about some identity politics. But before we get started, please hit like, please hit subscribe, turn your notifications on. And if you've already done that, go find your mother and father, make them turn their notifications on and hit like and subscribe. If you've done that, get your brothers and sisters and a few million of your closest friends, because it really helps us out with the algorithm. But anyway, so we're going to get started. Why don't we start with a good definition for identity politics? You want to give us your definition?
Sure. I would say identity politics is loosely seen as affiliating somebody with a political position or party based on perceived or identity, usually one that they don't have control of, such as race, ethnicity, complexion, and then attributing that they must belong to a certain group or tribe and must then vote according in block or assuming that they will then support people with similar attributes, ethnic, racial, or otherwise.
Right. I like that. I like that definition. I would probably say essentially the same thing. Now, one thing I might add to it is there's often this sense of, essentialism, where like even if all the members of, for example, a certain race, like African American or Hispanic or white, even if they don't all have the same attribute, it's kind of like an assumed same attribute, even if it's not, it kind of acknowledges that the attribute isn't necessarily there, but it like for the purposes of voting, like a good example is like African Americans are just typically assumed to be Democrats now, right? Like even though not all of them are.
If they're part of the African American community,
right? Yeah.
They use that sort of thing to see like that's the most salient or the most the most relevant identity,
right?
And so they need to vote according to that. When their identity, everybody has. You have 20. You probably have 1,000 different identities at different situations. Certain one is at the top, and certain one,
sure,
changes. They assume that when it comes to voting, your most important identity is your racial ethnicity.
Yeah, and I mean, I just on a general level, that I get this every time I hear it. It's like there's this feeling in the pit of my stomach that like it bothers me, right? Like it bothers me that I would be judged by my immutable characteristics, as opposed to characteristics that are obviously much more fluid, things that I can change, dynamic attributes, and not only for the fact that like it just doesn't ring true for me either. Like I feel like, yes, I'm white. I get no political leaning that I'm aware of because I'm white. Yes, I'm middle class, but again, I get no political leaning that I'm aware of because I'm middle class. Yes, I'm male, but again, I get no political leaning that I'm aware of.
Well, I think that's true. I think the whites are the ones throw up identity.
Yeah.
That both, or not throw up, but toss up identity that both parties compete for, because we tend to evaluate whether the party positions are in our favor and make sense and have strong opinions about what's responsible governance and will support those policies. Right. It's kind of assumed, really, since the 1960s, that identity should align with political persuasion. Mm. And I think part of this has become so much a part of our current politics because California, according to the Democrats, really succeeded by using identity politics to take over and have essentially one party rule in that state.
Right.
And so they're trying to that playbook wherever they can.
Can you give me an example of how that took place in California? Because I know some people may not be as familiar with.
So California used to be a toss-up state, would vote Republican a lot. Nixon, Kennedy were from there, especially Southern California was more conservative. I think Northern California, San Francisco is always pretty reliably very liberal as any place in the country. But Southern California and generally had Republican governors, especially. And there was a Republican governor in the 90s by the name of Pete Wilson. who supported a voter initiative. It wasn't a law he passed, but there was a voter initiative that would restrict government benefits to illegal immigrants. Being a border state, it's like we taking a lot of immigrants, but then when services get tapped out over max, they become strained. And so they thought, all right, the state will no longer guarantee these benefits. That might be a disincentive for people to come to California. And maybe they'll go to Texas or Arizona or something like that.
Can't have that.
And it was called Prop 187. And it passed. And right, everybody's sort of shocked, how could something like that pass? Well, in reaction to it passing, it was national groups got involved after it passed and said that it was very racist, against Hispanics. So it said any immigrant from any country would come here and it was not have the appropriate legal status wouldn't be guaranteed state benefits and such. And it sort of awakened, and they said, no Hispanic, this is anti-Hispanic especially, no Hispanic person can vote for the Republican Party, because it was supported by Pete Wilson, the Republicans. And they awakened this sort of sleeping there were a lot of sort of recent apolitical Hispanics in California that were citizens, but were not, because they had not studied or grown up in our system and studied governments and things like that, and so chose to sort of stay out of the political process. This awakened them, and they started voting en masse for Hispanic candidates who were especially Democrat. And very quickly, the law went before the Supreme Court, and it was ruled unconstitutional, so it never went into effect. But they were able to tag the Republican Party as a racist party against Hispanics. And now that state has one party rule, veto-proof majorities in there. And to the Democrats, that just seems as paradise.
Right, of course.
Right, that they have, the Republicans can say things, but they have no real power. And they get to rule the state however they wish. And so they're looking to that playbook. If they can exploit what they see as under voting and especially call Republicans racist over and over again. That succeed in California, they're hoping it will succeed. They've been doing it for so long, I think people are a little tone deaf to it.
Yeah, it's losing its...
But it's the expectation that Barack Obama had said something that people, according to their community identity, should be counted on to vote a certain way. You told me about that.
Yeah, Obama recently came out of you probably saw it on my short, but he came out of the woodwork to say that the brothers need to vote for Kamala Harris because they weren't voting in large enough quantity or percentage or something. I guess Obama was able to command, I think, 93 to 95% of the African American vote, and Kamala Harris.
Biden said something similar when he ran about if you vote.
Yeah, he said,
"What was his words? Part of the community. You're not black."
Yeah, you ain't vote for me. You're not black.
You ain't. Yeah,
you ain't black.
Right. Essentially, that you're not part of the community.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that I'm seeing is specifically those words are getting some lashback now. Finally, it's taken some time, I think, but now it's I'm seeing videos all over TikTok and a YouTube where people are saying, Obama, you have no right to tell us what we should vote, and same thing with Biden. Got the same thing. He's like, what do you mean I'm not black? Hey, who are you to tell me? Especially Biden, who's like the whitest guy on earth, like practically a ghost. But yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing. One of the I was reading a book by a CIA operative not long ago, and it was I have to get the name of the author and the title of the book, but basically he was discussing how to develop an asset, right? Because that's the job of a CIA operative is to find somebody and then sculpt them and your relationship with them until they've become yours, right? Until they'll do anything for you, until they give away state secrets or corporate espionage or whatever. And
so they're on your side.
Right, so they're on your side, exactly. And he's, there are various stages along the road to hell, but ultimately the final stage of this asset development was exactly that. It's called identity politics. Basically, it was convincing the person, like, let's say you're a CIA operative from America and you're trying to turn a Russian asset. The last step in this train is the last stop in this train is to convince that person I'm American. Now, like, basically you've convinced them to like shift their identity to align with yours 100%. Because after you get to that point, after you get to the point where the person says I'm this and because I'm this I do this, then you can make them do this, right? You can make them perform the way that is expected, the way that's
you can trust them
and it made me wonder that if that's a proven, it's got such a proven track record, if it's so powerful, if we're ever going to go back, like if we're ever going to get away from identity politics.
Well, it's interesting that you said, because Kamala Harris is trying to, at least herself directly, not play up her bona fides as the first time a woman become president, things like that. She's not trying to say that a lot. She doesn't have to, because her proxies and everybody's screaming it. The media is doing it for her. But she, at least to herself, is not trying to make her identity, or is the first person of her identity to, because if you drill down, it's like, you say Trump would be the first, this specific identity
you get far enough, you'll find.
He's the first. Everybody's
first person with a big nose.
And so she's not trying to say like I deserve the job because I'm the first of this. So she hasn't really tried to say that. Her proxies have said like we need to do this because of that, but. Yeah. I think the Americans have gotten over that. They see that's a weak argument.
I hope so.
That it was an important change in mass, but when we're choosing leaders, and like it's important, like the first person of this minority group to attend or belong to a prestigious institution or university, something like that. But for our leaders, it's like no, like you need to be good at the job. That should be the first, and so. Right, in a post-label or post-identity society, right, people would see, we don't want to be judged or assumed based on our labels. And they make demographic sweeps. They, when I was out with my daughter, we were walking the streets of Raleigh, and there were some people asking people, hey, would you like to register to vote?
Right.
I walked up, I'm a middle-aged white man. They did not talk to me.
Dazzlingly good looking.
I just walked past them, but they went right to my daughter.
Really?
Have you? Because white men are assumed demographically to be more likely to vote for
Trump.
Well, no, or just for Republicans.
For Republicans, okay.
And that young people, especially girls,
are
more likely to vote for Democrat.
Interesting.
So they were interested in making sure she was registered to vote and everything. Didn't even ask me. So they're already sort of keying in on likely voters. Right. It's part of their get out the vote too. Is they in California they do this too. There's a family living together, and when they could do ballot harvesting, which is illegal everywhere but in California, they would have somebody came 2 or 3 times to ask to collect the absentee ballot vote of their young daughter, who, is just according to their demographics that they were harvesting, not just we'd like to collect all the absentee ballots from this home. Is your daughter's absentee ballot ready to submit, right? So that type of, research and identity politics and AI is going to be around, hey, these people are most likely based on these characteristics to support your cause, and you need to reach out to them. I don't think it's going to go away, but it's going to try to become a little bit less obvious.
A little less, okay. I'd hope so. I mean, you would think that there. I guess I don't know exactly how much value there is in solidifying your base versus trying to reach out to like a new demographic. Like I think in this election in particular, I think Kamala has failed to reach the new demographic, which I think she had an opportunity to hit, and I think she tried to tackle it when she went on with Fox to talk to the demographic that is not typically, in her arena. But I think for people in this election in particular, Trump is just such a polarizing figure that like half of the group has decided they love Trump, and they're gonna vote for Trump no matter what. And half of the people have decided that they're going to vote against Trump even if there's a gun to their head. Right?
Yeah. They don't care the name on the other side.
Right.
Nobody's voting. They're not voting for Kamala. They're voting against
It
Trump.
could literally be a cardboard cutout as long as it is not Trump, and they would vote for. But there is this third group, and it's relatively small this time because Trump is the referendum. But it's relatively small. But I feel like Trump isn't bothering to look at that last demographic, and Kamala isn't either, although she could have. She had like this chance to like go on Fox and say, something to the effect of, hey, I didn't agree with Biden on all of his policies, but I was the VP, not the president, so I couldn't make all the decisions. Yeah. Here's what I would have done differently. Like she could have tried to appeal to that last group, and she just like didn't bother to try to do that at all, and hasn't for her entire campaign. I'm wondering if it's just been decided over time. I'm sure the studies somewhere, if it's just been decided over time that, trying to find a new demographic is just so costly that it's just not worth it.
Well, I mean, that's what the donors are. They're trying to get out unlikely voters.
Right.
Because likely voters have already made up their mind.
Right.
People that don't or are unlikely to vote, especially, right? So they will slice you into, you're a likely voter. That's usually the most valuable group for primaries,
right?
Right.
Okay.
Right, because those are the people. A lot of people skip the primaries,
right?
But they will. But the likely voters, that you want to get those. Then there's registered voters,
right?
Then there's people that have registered and let their registration lapse. So it seems that they've been registered in the past, but maybe their address changed or something like that. Trying to recapture those people.
Sure.
And then there's the unlikely voters, people who've never voted, who are. And those are low information voters, but you have to do something to try to excite them, or something. And so there's a lot of money. There is money being poured in, right? It's it's hard to see how effective.
Yeah, is it just not as cost balanced? Is it like?
I don't think you and I are going to see it because if it's on and algorithms are going to send it to people that are unlikely to be us.
Yeah, well, I mean, people, you might be surprised, actually, believe it or not, and this may come as a shock to some of the people. I mean, it isn't a shock to those who have been watching the channel for a while that I don't like Trump. I've never liked Trump. But it may be a shock to them to know that my vote was up for grabs this election.
Yeah.
And someone could have gotten it. Like it's at the moment, nobody's trying to get it, and so I feel like I'm probably just going to default into. Actually, if for no other reason, I'll probably vote for Trump just because Elon Musk is going to head his Department of Efficiency, which is like that's enough for me. But this was an election where either one of those parties could have said, could have just started taking accountability for the situation that we're in, try to give us a clear path. I don't think either of their paths are very clear. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was odd that like my demographic was just like left off.
I felt the VPs a little bit tried to enter the center. There was some tokenism about that, but nobody, especially Tim Walz, who has governed from such a far left position, nobody really believed his appeals or. And right when he was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, we should do that together. And Kamala for a while was co-opting Trump's ideas. Trump would say something like, cutting taxes on tips or doing different stuff, and she would parrot it. And this is a type of thing where normally it's like now she, rather than appeal to a base or very progressive, she's got to appeal to the masses. She doesn't know how to do that, so she's just parroting his positions.
Right. It works.
But nobody believed that she would follow through with that.
Right.
It rings hollow. And the slightest little bit of prodding from even favorable journalists shows there's
no end.
There's no suit. It's an empty suit. As far as those positions, how would you be centrist on this? Oh no, her fallback is going to be very liberal.
Right.
And so, but.
So I just wasn't the demographic that people were shooting.
And I'm wondering if there are independent voters, like yours, who maybe didn't vote for Trump before because of all the negative things the media said about him, all the controversy. Right. They just they're like, all right, Biden's a long time known entity. I just want things to calm down, and I at least know adults will be running the country.
Right.
Adults were running the country under Trump, but he himself was wildly tweeting and saying stuff. I'm not carrying water for everything Trump says either, and I don't think he would want to be friends with me or be friends with him. But that's not what this election is about necessarily. Likability,
Right.
Certainly, neither candidate is likable.
Well, let me ask you this: so I can think of a lot of examples of identity politics that I perceive as negative, right?
Oh, yeah.
And examples of the like a couple just list off the top of my head would be like critical race theory is a prime example of like a targeting a specific group based on specifically the color of their skin, and it to me that's a very negative thing because it tries to overlay traits like if you're black it means you're poor, if you're black it means you're less able to get a job, not educated, all these things. It tries to put these negative traits on someone based only, and conversely, if you're white, you're entitled. You've never learned to face adversity. You've never learned to fight your own battles, etc., etc.
Hey, when my third yacht is broken down and unusable, that's real adversity.
I had to give up my property in Martha's Vineyard. No, and some others I think the trans movement is is a very heavy identity politicking zone that has it's a lot of gamesmanship instead of any truth value. I think a lot of these groups, they lump together in their identity components because of political power.
Yes.
Not because there's truth value behind the traits that are assigned to those groups. And I think they kind of know it, they all kind of say together, it's in between. If you were to ask them, do you all have this same trait? They're like, no, of course not. We're as different as we are similar. But when it comes to wielding that political power, but here's my question: is there an example of good identity politics, or can you think of a situation where? Because I'm guessing, at some point in time that you have to find a group to band together, or else the little guy never gets looked out for, right? Women never get suffragette.
Well, yeah, this was the part of the arguments in formation of the Constitution was that if and why we're not a true democracy, because then the majority has the tyranny over the minority, and so really our system of Republican government gives undue power to the minority, the ability to stop legislation, the filibusters, things like that. The small groups can have their voice, and the system is set up to move very slowly and have lots of breaks, lots of ways to stop it.
Right.
To be responsive to those minorities, so that the government cannot become tyrannical just because the majority wants it a certain way. And we took a poll, this is how people want, boom, this is instantly policy. No. Right? So as far as good identity politics, you can have it's usually on, I would not say on a federal level, but on the state or even community level, about certain communities that are struggling, have certain social problems. Sometimes Native American population, sometimes it's white populations in Appalachia, sometimes it's other populations that could have particular health concerns, right?
Sure.
Right. It was a homosexual population in the 80s and 90s with the AIDS outbreak that they needed to find people who identify that way so that they could get the care and services they need. That was sort of a little bit of the beginning of the political power, was getting these people to sort of band together so that they could be served. Right. It was a public health crisis. So, and when there are crises, certain things happen. But in general, I would say judging people or serving people based on their identity, especially their racial, their ethnic, their religious identity, feels un-American.
Yeah.
It feels tyrannical and feels like oppression.
So this would be my I guess my generalization that I came to was identity politics is probably a good thing when the goal is to remove identity from the politics. as opposed to adding it to impact. Like, for example,
Expand,
I think like the civil rights movement, in my mind, was a positive identity political movement because the goal was to find equal treatment, to remove the identity and to get that kind of universal treatment, as opposed to like to go past that point, swing the pendulum the other direction, and to use it to like, you know, get additional treatment or additional, right? Like, same thing, like if I think, you know, if a group is persecuted, like if women don't have the right to vote, for example, then I like that, you know, the suffragette movement gets us to a point where the identity is no longer there, and that, you know, everyone can vote. But the moment it gets to a point where now somebody wants more than their share because of their identity, that's when I think I have a problem with it.
Yeah, well, like if a judge wants to hear your case, you have a completely legitimate case, then he finds out you're part of a certain identity.
Right.
Men with mustaches. Oh, I'm sorry. The case dismissed.
No question.
Whatever identity he chooses. Right. So yeah, you definitely right. And so that's when we were civil rights. Were a foundation of the Republican Party. The Democrats co-opted it to make it there in their appeal. Right.
Sure.
They were the party of Jim Crow,
right,
and of separate but equal, and of segregation. This was all Democrat politics.
On that note, I want to just derail a quick common rejoinder to that I hear all the time, and it's like this tennis match between the Republicans and the Democrats to like try to claim civil rights, right?
Yeah.
In reality, to be the as fair as we can, I would say it's most accurate that neither party today is really the party of civil rights. It's probably most accurate to say that the Republicans at the time, sure, were more in favor of the civil rights movement than the Democrats at the time. It also is not fair to say that the two parties just flip-flopped. That's the common Democrat rejoinder, is that, oh, the Dixiecrats, you know, they just switched positions. No, they didn't. What they both did was they both went to different demographics to try to gain new political power in new arenas, and it had nothing to do with like this reversal of power. It was or a reversal of stance. But I just wanted to stop that before the comments start lighting up with oh, well, that's actually Democrats in disguise, you know, the Democrats of the day. No, that's not what it was. But yeah, so now let me ask this question. So what about when I hear on the right-hand side, I hear people say things like, this is a Christian nation, and things like that. That's kind of an identity politic in and of itself. What's your thought on that?
Well, it's that, so the Christian values,
for someone who's named Christian, I feel like this is, you know, nobody else could answer better.
I think the Christian values that are so deeply entwined with Western civilization since the first century are enshrined in our Constitution. Essentially, the value of human life, the value of the individual, and the government should not oppress and should give that individual, right, the Bill of Rights should ensure that individual, because that individual is worth something, they're a child of God. And even like the Christian idea that we shouldn't be forced to be Christian.
Right.
That it should be arguments, it should be persuasion, patience, long suffering.
Right.
And it should be an act of faith for them to follow. Also leads, you know, that we can't force certain ideas down people's throats. We have to have freedom of speech. We have to make our pitch and hope that person agrees with us or whatever. That there's limited, we're limited in our capacity to tyrannically coerce, right? And it has to be really extreme circumstances, which is, because that's really powerful. The power of violence held by the government, the power to coerce, is something that we entrust to them as people, hoping that they're going to be very responsible and careful with using that, and why there's a lot of litigation whenever they do that. People file lawsuits, they want to get it all the way up to see, like, are they doing this appropriately? Because if they're not, if they're cavalier about it, it becomes a hellscape, like so many failed nations.
So then how do you arbitrate the, because it feels like that's a form of identity politics, but it's a really weird one, because it's almost like you're telling me that we're all Christian to start out, because of the Western philosophy. But how do you? It's kind of awkward because then, of course, the Western philosophy self-contains the opportunity to not agree with the Western philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So
because there's no institutional state religion,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was enshrined in the Constitution, right? They very much wanted it to be,
Right.
but they said no. Even though the cultural benefits of Christianity are founded in our values, and even from the Declaration of Independence, it says, right. We believe in natural laws, that we're imbued with our Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Right.
That we're just making sure the government can't stomp on those.
Right.
That those rights weren't given to you. Government didn't give you those rights. God gave you those rights.
Right.
That's a very Christian idea, but we don't have a state religion. We do allow people to, as far as their faith and spiritual practice, worship how, where, what they may, or not to. But the Christian values that still are part of our justice system, particularly, are that innocent before proven guilty, because your life, you're not just a statistic. You're an individual. You're a child of God.
Right. Absolutely. So now, what are your thoughts on shared experience? Because this is another one that I see in the political arena a lot. Is they'll kind of like Kamala Harris, for example. I grew up a middle class kid, right? And so she goes out of her way to mention that over and over and over again, because she wants to be viewed as the president that understands the middle class because of shared experience, right? It's another form of identity politics through classism, right? What are your thoughts on that? Because I've always felt like just because I'm middle class and you're middle class, that really doesn't mean much in the way.
It doesn't mean that you have a right to lead.
Right.
I mean, look.
Nor does it give you any great spontaneous knowledge as to policy decisions or.
Yeah.
So
I would rejoin to that. Methinks thou dost protest too much.
Yeah.
Right. She's an elite. Trump's an elite.
Yeah. They are.
Everybody at this level, to get to this level, she's been a U.S. senator.
Yeah.
She was elected to
Both her
statewide
parents are
office
Ivy League professors
in California.
Yeah.
Right. She's an elite,
Yeah.
and people generally don't like the elites. But that's who we elect to run our government. Even George Bush, who talked like a Texan, went to Yale.
Yeah.
Right. He was an elite, and his father and everybody around him, that worked for him and helped administer his government were an elite.
I wonder is there a way to. I mean, is that inevitable? Do we always just gonna?
Well,
or is there a way that a non-elite can get the kind of reach and visibility? I'm thinking, now that we're in the age of podcasts, like great ones like this one, and where we can the common man
is kept out of power.
Right.
Common man is deprived of power. Well, because it's one thing to have ideas and to be an advisor on policy, or like Trump or Kamala or whoever in power could come in and ask us our ideas, put us in a focus group or something like that. But then to actually administer
they don't
administer the departments, that's always been, even in English, the French have always done that. They've sort of trained their civil servants. Mm-hmm. It's usually with a lot of classical education.
Yeah.
To do that, and that the ideas of the common man need to be heard, but that you want somebody like J.D. Vance, who grew up, poorer in common households, but then you want to recognize his unique intelligence, and then hopefully recognize it early, and then educate him and give them a chance to become an elite.
Sure.
Right? We probably should have been. We were intelligent enough to become elites, but for whatever reason, they missed the boat on us, and we're normal working guys.
See if I can find my ticket again.
And so that's the type of thing. But just because somebody's an elite doesn't disqualify them from leadership, and that somebody, but trying to identify as a middle class, because that's just a large demographic. That's just an appeal for voters, and that people might feel like, hey, this person's more like me, can empathize with me, when based on our policies are so leftist, they're really not in line with any type of middle class value or normal mainstream thing. But trying to look like, hey, I didn't grow up eating in some sort of cartoonish Richie Rich land. So don't hate me. I'm not the spoiled little rich girl. We're past that, right? This is adults who were voted for president of the United States. So that's why that thing sort of rings hollow.
Did you see that Trump worked at McDonald's today? Just
yes.
to prove that he has worked. I mean, that's pretty. I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, it's kind of silly, right? It's like, I think it's cute that he did it. I think it's probably largely for humor. But that having been said, he hasn't like earned any additional esteem in my mind for having done that. You know.
Right. Hillary tried to drink beer in pubs when she was running for office, and it just was like, you know, it's not who she is. There's no sincerity to it, and I think what people want more from anyone is authenticity.
Yeah.
And a window into what really matters to this person, and how, because that will help them know how they're going to govern or how they're going to respond in a crisis. Is this person somebody that needs other people to guide them? Is this person strong and have their own moral compass? And evoking the middle class is a sort of shorthand way for some people to say, I have all this strength that comes from that middle class upbringing. Though she hasn't shown it from her policy career achievements.
That's the same thing that all the identity politicking is supposed to do, right? It's like supposed to be because you're African American, for example, that you know you've been historically downtrodden, and so you've gained that strength from that kind of like lower class experience, I guess, or whatever. Even though many of them are not lower class.
Well, yeah. Well, one of my favorite stories was Obama talking about how, like, when he was a successful, wealthy, Harvard-educated man, when he'd walk down the street, women would clutch their purses and switch to the other side of the street. And how he felt like his race was, and I'm like, I'm a white dude. I walk down the street, women clutch their purses and switch to the other side of the street.
You're like 6 foot, you're huge.
Society has just taught women to be aware of men they don't know, strange men, right? And so when I see it, I'm like, okay, she's afraid of me. That's unfortunate. We were just going to walk past each other, but that's what society has taught her. He sees the same thing, and he sees it through the lens of his race and defines it and understands it by that. And so I think that's the thing when people want to say, like, we get called racist or that it's all about race. I'm like, no, we've had a lot of common experiences. Sometimes it's just a woman's afraid. Because this is somebody they don't know.
They cross the street when I'm about to walk past, especially because I cross the street also with them back and forth, and after the third or fourth time they start running. And
it could be their form of flirting. Oh my gosh, this guy's so handsome! I got to cross the street, and
right. I'm kidding. Any other thoughts on identity politics?
Well, I'm more interested in its current application, and I think the thing is that the Democrats, I would push back on the fallacy that Democrats are the only ones whose government can be good for people with certain identities.
Yeah.
The Trump and the Republicans can be good for even identities that wield all their political power for the Democrats.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the thing. People voting in their best interest. They think of that when they think of them broadly based on identities and demographics. But I think, that when people look at the hard thing in their experience 4 years ago under Trump, that the bluster of the media told them was overblown, and their identity still profited, and that when they had somebody who was supposedly for their identity's political power in power for the last 4 years of Joe Biden, their lives haven't improved and they've been problems. Yeah. So that's the thing, awakening people to that and helping them see through that. Hopefully that will lead to people making a wise civic decision when it comes to choosing the leader of our country.
You would hope. But guys, let me know what you think. Put some thoughts in the comments. I do read those. I do respond. So looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. And we'll catch you guys next time on Common Mansplaining.